disclaimer, I'm filming a YouTube. When shooting 35mm film, you're gonna wanna be looking for C41 film. It's also called color negative film, and again, in the size 35mm. These are all descriptions that you might see when you're searching for film online, and you're gonna wanna make sure that you're purchasing the right type of film for your film camera. I tend to love Kodak film the best. Again, this isn't sponsored, but after shooting for 6+ years with film, I just have found that my editing style with my digital images closely resembles what I create with Kodak film. My number one film stock that I love is Kodak Gold 200. Some other really popular Kodak film stocks are Kodak Ultramax 400, Kodak Portra 800, Kodak Portra 400, and Kodak Max 800. When searching online, you might also see Fujifilm 200 come up as an option when you're searching for Kodak Gold, and I'm going to explain that hopefully in as little words as possible. Over the past few years and all the chaos that our country went through with low stock inventory and the pandemic, Fujifilm in Japan was having trouble getting their film made and sent to the US. So Fujifilm in North America decided to go under contract with Kodak and re-spool the Kodak Gold to sell as Fujifilm 200 because their profiles are exactly the same and they're just two competing companies. And so they did this to be able to get more Fujifilm to people in the United States if that was their preference. They wanted to be able to sell their film still to Americans that was film already in America, basically just cutting down the cost as much as they could. So a little hack, if you love Kodak Gold as much as me, you can also purchase the new Fuji 200 and you'll be shooting Kodak Gold. The reason I love Kodak Gold 200 is because it has a very fine grain, it has warm and natural tones, and it has medium contrast. Basically, Kodak Gold or Fujifilm 200 is considered a consumer grade film. Anyone can shoot on it. It's basically not super fancy, but not the cheapest, and it's just a classic film stock that you can purchase if you want all of your film to look the same or you're just starting out. This film is a little different than the highly specialized film like Kodak Portra, Fujifilm Provia, or Fujifilm Pro 400H. These film stocks all have very specific color iterations and profiles to them, so the images look a lot more specific and stand out a lot more compared to the more neutral look that you get with Kodak Gold or Fujifilm 200. Even as a wedding photographer that's shooting 35mm film, I opt for Kodak Gold or other similar film stocks, Kodak Ultramax, because I can find just a consistent look and it most closely matches my editing style that is warm, has fine grain, and has medium to low contrast. When you buy a roll of film, it comes in usually a little plastic canister like this. Some companies now make them cardboard to cut down on plastics, but your film is going to look like this. It's a little canister and part of your film should be sticking out. That's how you know it's not been exposed yet. Every roll of film has a number rating on it, and this is known as your ISO. If you're familiar with shooting digital images and shooting manually with a digital SLR, you know that your ISO is one of the factors that affects the light in each image. 100 is the lowest ISO and it lets in the least amount of light, which is great for when you're shooting on a bright day outside, especially on a day like today when it's snowing and the world is covered in white. You'd be wanting to shoot on an ISO of 100. ISOs get higher as they let in more light, and those are appropriate when you're coming into darker light situations. So if you're indoors, if you're shooting at night, if you're not shooting with a flash, or you're shooting in various light scenarios like going from indoor to outdoor, you're going to want to be shooting with an ISO of 400 or an ISO of 800. I usually only shoot with an ISO of 800 film when I'm shooting all indoors. I have found that an ISO of 200 is my sweet spot that I like to shoot with because it allows me to shoot mostly outside film. But if you're starting out, a safe bet would be to start with 400 or 200 film. This is just the most versatile. It's not for the brightest of light scenarios or the darkest of light scenarios for shooting film. And so it usually helps you when you're changing other settings, just being in a good sweet spot to create a well-exposed image. Again, if you don't know what ISO means or you're unfamiliar with everything I just said, I will be explaining more in the upcoming videos. So where can you purchase this film? You definitely can purchase this film on Amazon, and some people talked about a film shortage in recent times, but it's not as dramatic as people say. You can definitely search online and buy 35mm film. And just like when you're buying your camera, you need to make sure that you're buying from a reputable source though, and sometimes on Amazon you're buying from a reseller. Film has to be stored at a very specific temperature range, usually in a cool temperature in a dry place, so there's not humidity or fluctuating temperatures, which can cause your film to basically not work. Also, if you're buying from somewhere out of the country, depending on how it's shipped, your film might have gone through an airport scanner, which means if it has, there's a high chance that the film is now exposed and you won't be able to use it either. That's why it's kind of tricky to buy your film on eBay or even trust Amazon when you're purchasing from a reseller. So here's the places I like to purchase my film. Most of these places are not only selling film, but they process film. And sometimes you can get a deal if you purchase film that you're also going to be sending back to that same place to be processed. I like to use these websites that I know I can trust, and I know I can trust to have good prices, not price gouging me because I don't know what I'm buying. Indie Film Lab, Photovision, and The Fine Lab are all great companies that are not only selling film, but are a trusted lab. When buying film, you can expect to pay anywhere from $5 or $6 to upwards of $20. If you're looking at that specialty film, like I discussed a few minutes ago, you're definitely going to be spending upwards of $20 on each roll of film. But if you're starting out and want to purchase something like Fujifilm 200 or Kodak Gold, Kodak Ultramax, you should be expecting to pay anywhere from like $6 to $10, sometimes 11 or 12. One thing I like to do is purchase my film every once in a while from my local lab, showing them that there's still interest in the film community. But sometimes you spend a little bit more when purchasing local, just like you do anything. Almost done with our first lesson. If your hands are getting tired from writing all these notes, don't worry. Remember that you can always look back at this video. But finally, we're going to be discussing how to get your film processed. You might not know what getting your film processed means. Basically, getting your film processed is how it comes out of the camera, enters a lab, and is able to come back to you as a print or a digital scan. You might be surprised to find that your town or your next closest city has a film lab. I live in Pittsburgh and there's several film labs in the area. I believe there's 3 all within an hour distance from me. Not only when I first started, but even through to today with my own personal film, I like to support my local lab where I can drive my film to the lab, drop it off, and get those digital scans back, knowing that I'm not paying too high of a price because I'm using a local lab. You're cutting down on costs because you don't have to pay for shipping, and as a small business, I just like to support local. If you live in a place that doesn't have a film lab nearby, or it's not ideal for you to be driving more than an hour every once in a while to drop off film, you can use an online film lab. Here's a list of the top film labs that I either know, have used, or have had very close friends use. Price-wise, I would say Photovision is a great bang for your buck. You're usually paying about $25 per roll to get your film processed and scanned. So what do I mean by getting your film processed and scanned? Well, each roll of film, like I said, comes in these canisters, and when you're done shooting it and you successfully take it out of your camera, there's not going to be any film sticking out. It's all going to be inside this spool, and you are going to need to take it to a lab. When they receive your film, they are going to charge you per roll of film. Color negative film usually is around $16 to $25, depending on if you want to get that film back to you in a medium to low quality grade that's good for sharing online, or a medium to large grade that's great for printing images up to 16 by 20 prints for portraits, wedding photography, professional photography. Each lab scans a little bit differently because there's no set standard on how to scan and process your film, but it also depends on how the chemicals are proportioned, how they're monitored, and who's doing the processing. To explain it quickly, Your film is processed in chemicals in a dark room where there's no light, and then is able to be brought out into light but is showing a color negative image. That's why it's called color negative film. Then that film on a long black strip, that film strip is then put onto a scanner and scanned onto a computer where the image is then flipped, made positive, and then adjusted a tiny bit. Some film labs process but do not adjust their scans at all, meaning you have to adjust your scans when you get home to correct them a little bit. If that's the case, you're going to be adjusting things like temperature, tint, contrast, and exposure. Not fully editing the image, but adjusting it a little bit. What I recommend is that you look for a lab that allows you to have a custom profile for your scans. That means that whenever they process your film, scan it, and get their image on their computer, they have a custom set of changes that they make to the image to make it look not only like the film stock that it is, but like a photo that you shot, meaning it looks consistent among all the other film that you shoot at the same film stock. When starting out, it's not as important to find a film lab that creates custom profiles for scanning your film. It may be important to you in the long run to have a lab that uses specific profiles when adjusting images after they've been scanned, but in the beginning, it's probably not something that's super important. You can always adjust your scans at home using an editing software like Lightroom to get your image to look exactly how you want it. Each person is going to choose things a little bit differently. Sorry, that's my dog. Like adjusting the contrast, adjusting the warmth, the temperature, and again, it's all personal preference. You might be thinking that the whole point of shooting film is that you don't have to edit it, but that's not entirely true. I was confused on this when I started also, because the first lab that I used had a set processing system, so every roll that I sent was processed with the same profile, and all my film really looked the same depending on which film stock I was using. Once I relocated and had to start using a different local lab, I realized that that lab does things a little bit differently than my old lab, and I had to discuss with them how to adjust my scans specifically for how I like my film to come out. A little warmer, a little less contrast, basically just creating film scans that look like I took them. One tip for doing this is when you're choosing a lab, before you get your film processed, ask them what the outcome of their scans usually is. Do they have low contrast? Do they tend to have high contrast? Are their greens more blue-green or more yellow-green? I always recommend that when using a in-person lab or an online lab, you send with your film a reference image, meaning an image that you shot on film in the past, or even a digital image of what you like your edits to look like, and send that along so they know how to adjust your scans once they get them to their computer. I'm so glad you watched this video. Now you are definitely on your way to shooting film. If you got to this point and you haven't taken notes on all the ins and outs of what I shared during this video, I got you. Click the link below, type in your email, and I'll be sending you a free guide that's going over everything I discussed. Some of this is opinion, my recommendations on where to purchase, what film to purchase, and how to get your film processed. But if you want a concise PDF guide sharing everything that I discussed in today's video, again, just click that link below, enter your email, and I will be sending you that guide. Come back next week to lesson number 2, where we're going to be discussing how to load your new first roll of film onto your 35mm film camera and get shooting. Cheers, friend. See ya. And start shooting. I'm Becca Grimm, and this is the series Let's Learn Film.